Craft and the International Station. And that's the second checkpoint. They have already reached waypoint 0 to begin this process. Waypoint 0, waypoint 1, and then on to waypoint 2, which we mentioned is about 20 meters away.
И всем привет, с вами Space, вы попали на прямую трансляцию стыковки пилотируемого космического корабля Crew Dragon, миссия Axiom 4 с Международной космической станции. Меня этот их сейчас доконает. Какого хрена?
Looking at the
Ура!
Dragon Grace spacecraft, that strobe light illuminating its path, as well as the port and starboard side lights, the red and green that you see on your screen. They're actually crossing over the Pacific Ocean, about to cross over the equator, and then eventually make its way over the west coast of North America.
Насолоджуйся смачними лимонадами, в яких ми поєднали натуральні грузинські соки та природні.
Spacecraft and the International Space Station, the spacecraft and the International Space Station once again become illuminated with...
Ой, я дебил, блин, короче. У нас же на ютубе есть же стрим на канале Axiom Space нормальный. А не этот X конченый. Так вот, в среду 25 июня в 6:31 по UTC Falcon 9 запустила Axiom Space Mission 4. Компания Axiom Space на Международную космическую станцию со стартовой площадки C213.1 в Космическом центре имени Кеннеди NASA во Флориде. После разделения ступень, первая ступень Falcon 9 C213.1 приземлилась на посадочную площадку C1 на станции космических с Канаверал во Флориде. Dragon C213.1 Grace автономно состыкуется с космической станцией в четверг, 26 июня, примерно в 10:18 по UTC. Стыковку, блин, перенесли на 42 минуты раньше. То есть стыковка будет уже через 18 минут. За время работы на орбитальной лаборатории экипаж проведет более 60 научных экспериментов, демонстраций, посвященных исследованиям человека, наблюдению за Землей, а также наукам о жизни, биологии и материалах.
JAXA, the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency, who just recently celebrated about 2 weeks ago his 200 days in space, and McLean, NASA flight engineer, will be there as well. Her and Nicole Ayers, the two NASA astronauts.
Dragon 2 это класс частично многоразовых космических аппаратов, разработанных и изготовленных и эксплуатируемых американской космической компанией Space для полетов на Международную космическую станцию, части космических миссий. Космический аппарат, состоящий из одноразовой космической капсулы, одноразового модуля грузовой отсека, имеет два варианта: 4-местный Crew Dragon и Cargo Dragon. Замена грузовой капсулы Dragon 1. Космический аппарат запускается на ракете Falcon 9, а капсула возвращается на Землю способом приводнения. Стартовая масса составляет 12,5 тонн, сухая масса 7,7 тонн, грузоподъемность 6 тонн на низкую околоземную орбиту, 3307 кг на МКС, 2507 кг может вернуть на Землю и 800 кг утилизировать при сжигании в атмосфере вместе с грузовым отсеком. Напорный объем составляет 9,3 кубических метра и без давления 37 кубических метров. В грузовом отсеке уменьшены постоянно тока на 28 и 120 вольт, солнечные батареи мощностью от 1,5 до 2 кВт, 4 литий-полимерных аккумулятора. Может прожить до 10 дней в автономном полете и до 210 дней прицепленным к МКС. Капсула сама имеет высоту 4,5 метра. Весь корабль с грузовым отсеком 8,1 метра, диаметр до 4 метров. Все было построено 13 кораблей, из которых 7 пилотируемых, 3 грузовых, 3 прототипа. И вот сейчас используется 5 пилотируемых, 3 грузовых, корабля. И вот это все. То есть это был последний корабль Dragon построенный. Далее все полеты будут выполняться уже этими кораблями. Все равно им осталось, ну, хотя, ну, кстати, до 2030 года же, пока у нас МКС будет живая, блин, потому что, ну, не знаю, летать на МКС на Старшипе, там Старшип будет размером в половину МКС. Кстати, как видите, у нас обновленная телеметрия. Показывает теперь справа сверху скорость и высоту. То есть раньше этой телеметрии не было вообще. Итак, первый запуск пилотируемого корабля без экипажа был 2 марта 2019 года с экипажем 30 мая 2020 года. Масса топлива составляет 2562 килограмма. Там устанавливается 16 двигателей Драко, которые работают у нас на тетраксиде азота и мономентилгидрозине, имеет тягу в 400 ньютонов в вакууме, удельный импульс 300 секунд. Вот они используются как двигатели РСУ. И также ставится 8 двигателей супердрака в качестве системы аварийного спасения. Использует так... Нет. Тут используется тетраксид азота, монометилгидрозина. Да, вот. И тяга 71 кН для каждого двигателя. Давление в камере сгорания 6,9 МПА, удельный импульс 235 секунд. Емкость топливного бака для двигателей системы аварийного спасения 1388 килограмм. Вот так выйдет, ну, этот космический корабль, вот его схема. 4 места для экипажа. То есть парашюты, потом люк для доступа экипажа, двигатели Драко, двигатели кластер 2 двигателей Супер Драко, вот еще они. 5. Топливный бак, потом порт стандарта Международной космической станции IDSS, крышка порта. Панели управления, ну, монитор для управления, грузовой поддон, зона крепления груза, система контроля окружающей среды, теплозащитный экран. Вот он в сравнении с Союзом, русским, китайским Шэньчжоу, американским Старлайнером и американским Орионом. Это система аварийного спасения с Земли. Это уже почти, я так понимаю, чисто пошли. Вот все, 51 выполненная миссия, 46 полетов на МКС и 31 повторный полет. То есть вот у нас кластеры двигателей системы аварийного спасения, кластеры двигателей Драко, открывающийся носовой конус, под которым, собственно, стыковочный модуль. Да. Тут у нас установлен тепловой щит, вот такая вот система, за которым присоединяется к грузовому отсеку, сам грузовой отсек, на котором установлены 4 аэродинамических таких элемента для стабилизации корабля при срабатывании системы аварийного спасения. На одной стороне грузового отсека установлена солнечная панель, на другой стороне радиатор. Вот двигатели Драко.
station, Dragon Grace, to swinging up and over top of it, and then arriving at that docking access en route to waypoint 2. We'll continue to bring views of the International Space Station and Dragon Grace spacecraft as we receive them, as the two continuing their chase to connect up, as they're now making their way towards the western coast of North America in an orbital nighttime configuration. And we've seen views of the Dragon spacecraft in that orbital nighttime, with the strobe lights shining bright. Once it gets closer, it'll actually illuminate the International Space Station and allow for greater views of the docking port itself that it'll connect to, and again, that node 2 is Zenith port of the Harmony module of the space station. And that anticipated docking time that has now recently been updated to 5:30 a.m. Central, 6:30 a.m. Eastern. Teams on the ground have pulled go for our Dragon's approach to waypoint 1, and that arrival to that checkpoint will be a little more than 5 minutes from now. The crew inside Dragon Grace, Axiom Mission 4.
I believe that SpaceX and Axiom Space are serving as pathfinders for what commercial space is going to be in the future.
It is like a paradigm shift in how we used to think about space. And companies like SpaceX, Axiom Space are doing things that entire countries have done in the past.
SpaceX is a crucial partner that allows us to go to the International Space Station. In general, space is a big team sport, and that collaboration offers more and more possibilities to explore. In our case, this is the Dragon capsule and the Falcon 9 rocket. In the future, it might be different solutions.
It has been 5 years now that SpaceX have been sending humans to space. We are using SpaceX technology because we know that it's safe and reliable, that it will bring us safely to the International Space Station. And not only going there, but also coming back.
The end goal for Axiom is to have that mission and presence in low Earth orbit that will enable scientific research, technology demonstrations, and expand what we are doing in space. These precursor missions, like the Axiom 4 mission, are just the tip of the iceberg for expanding in low Earth orbit and way beyond even.
Like we say, that space has space for everyone, and this is what it means. And I think that is the essence of space flight.
Station, and then eventually the Dragon Grace spacecraft, as we get now views inside of Dragon Grace. And looking over the shoulders of...
Компания SpaceX была основана, чтобы помочь создать будущее, в котором не только сотни, но и тысячи людей, в конечно, в итоге миллионы людей смогут путешествовать за пределы Земли, жить и работать в космосе и на других планетах, и пилотируемых космических миссий является важнейшим шагом на пути, являющийся к этой реальности.
Side of the screen, in which Dragon now flying up and over top of the International Space Station, and now we get great views.
Миссии NASA Space Station Dragon позволили реализовать более 1000 научных и исследовательских проектов на низкоколоземной орбите и лабораторий, орбитальной лаборатории, включая выполнение 60 научных экспериментов, представляющих 31 страну в рамках сегодняшней миссии Axiom 4. С тех пор, как НАСА с тех пор Dragon благополучно доставил на орбиту 66 членов экипажа из 17 стран. Сегодняшняя миссия заведет с собой первую национальную миссию на космическую станцию для Индии, Польши и Венгрии.
Houston, copy.
Немного про экипаж корабля. Уитсон Пегги Аннет. 419 космонавт мира, 264 космонавт США. Родилась 9 февраля 1960 года в США. Окончила Сирианский колледж Айовы со степенью бакалавра по биологии и химии. Получила степень доктора наук по биохимии в университете Райса в Хьюстоне. Работала в различных научных учреждениях НАСА. С 1996 года в отряде космонавтов НАСА. Как астронавт НАСА совершил 3 космических полета общей продолжительностью 665 суток. Во время этих полетов 10 раз выходил в открытый космос с общей продолжительностью выхода в открытый космос 60 часов. В 2018 году покинула НАСА и перешла на работу в компании Axiom Space как частный астронавт. Совершил 1 полет в космос с продолжительностью 9 суток. Абсолютный рекордсмен по общей продолжительности космических полетов всей женщины, а также по общей продолжительности работы в открытом космосе. Это уже 5-й полет в ее карьере. Шукла Шубхан, 634 космонавт мира, 2-й космонавт Индии. Родился 10 октября 1985 года в Индии. В 2005 году в Национальной академии обороны получил степень бакалавра в области компьютерной техники. На службе в индийских ВВС с 2006 года служил в истребительском полку. В феврале 2019 года принимал участие в нанесении аэроударов по тренировочному лагерю террористов возле города Балакот в Пакистане. Занимался испытательной работой своими различными самолетами. Занимался испытательной работой, освоил различные самолеты, включая Су-30, МиГ-21, МиГ-29, Ягуар, Ховк, Доминер, Ан-32 и другие. В январе 2020 года был отобран в отряд космонавтов по программе «Гантьян», начавшийся сегодня полет первый в его карьере. Высотать ровно 420 километров. Если вы, конечно, понимаете, о чем я. Узнанский, Вишневский, Славуш. 635 космонавт мира, 2-й космонавт Польши. Родился 12 апреля 1984 года. В Лозинском техническом университете получил степень магистра наук. Во Франции получил степень магистра и диплом инженера политехнической школы этого университета. В 2011 году защищал диссертацию на соискание ученой степени доктора философии в области применения радиационно стойких конструкций для космических аппаратов. Работая в Европейском центре ядерных исследований, был ведущим инженером проекта Большого адронного коллайдера. В 2022 году отобран в отряд астронавтов Европейского космического агентства в качестве астронавта-резервиста. В 2023 году готовился к космическому полету по соглашению между польским космическим агентством и компанией Axiom Space. Это первый полет в его карьере. Тапу Кибор, 636 космонавт мира, 2-й космонавт Венгрии. Родился 5 ноября 1995 года. 1991. Окончил факультет машиностроения Будапештского университета технологий и экономики по специальности инженер-разработчик. Работал в фармацевтической промышленности. В 2004 году приступил к подготовке к космическому полету по соглашению между правительством Венгрии и компанией Axiom Space. Это также первый полет в его карьере.
Waypoint 2, which will be in about 9 minutes from now, and targeting and docking in about 14.5 minutes from there. Go to go poles for docking.
5-й и последний произведенный крювдрайн C213 получил собственное имя. Grace. Такой выбор был сделан экипажем корабля. Первым полетом для него стала миссия Axiom 4. Grace — это финальный 5-й корабль Крювдрайн. Больше новых кораблей строить не будут. Все миссии будут обеспечить повторное использование кораблей. Таким образом, Grace присоединяется к Endeavour, Resilience, Endurance и Freedom в составе пилотируемых космических кораблей SpaceX.
This is Mission Control Houston as Dragon Grace and the spacecraft carrying Axiom Mission 4 and their 4 astronauts continuing their approach to the International Space Station. They have just made their way past waypoint 1, which had them at 220 meters away from the space-facing port of the International Space Station's Harmony module. And now on the...
Ой, боже, эти Spaces меня доконают. Значит, сначала они переносят стыковку на 42 минуты раньше, а теперь опять на 12 минут вперед. И теперь стыковка запланирована на 11:30 по 10, то есть через 12 минут.
And that newly illuminated International Space Station as the two craft navigating its way over North America, coming into an orbital sunrise and daytime period. Vishnievsky of ESA
Dragon
and
SpaceX
Tibor
soft capture ring extension.
great community on what has been so far so good, a great rendezvous with the International Space Station. They will proceed to continue past waypoint 2. And you also heard in the communications with NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, the station ready for docking. And a great view of the SpaceX Dragon Grace spacecraft making its glacial approach to the International Space Station, and the view from the space station looking up as it approaches the space-facing or node 2 zenith port of the Harmony module. We are about 4 minutes away from the waypoint 2 arrival, which again they are expecting to move right past through without a hold. That is at the 20-meter mark, and proceed right on into docking, a soft capture, and then soft capture ring retraction and hooks to drive. And that capture about
Dragon
8 minutes
SpaceX
and 47.
on the big loop. Ground is go for approach 2, and approach is now allowed. Reminder: ensure that visors are closed prior to Dragon's departure from the waypoint. Once Dragon is inside the crew hands-off point, retreat and breakout are not permitted.
Dragon copies, and we have visors down, and we are go for docking as well. And copy on the approach. Inside 2, chop.
SpaceX copies, visors down. SpaceX crew is go for docking.
All great communications there as the communications from the ground up to the SpaceX Dragon Grace spacecraft, as visors are down on the 4 astronauts inside as they continue their approach to the International Space Station, now nearly 7 minutes away from that initial contact. Dragon and the International Space Station now making its way over the northernmost territories of North America and Canada, and heading towards the Atlantic Ocean, as we are now 7.5 minutes away from the approximate docking time, as Dragon will move smoothly past waypoint 2, about 20 meters away. And continuing its fine-tuning and approach, you see little plumes coming off the spacecraft. Again, those are those thruster firings, continuing to inch and adjust the spacecraft towards the orbiting laboratory. Dragon continuing to get bigger and bigger from the viewpoint of the International Space Station, as waypoint 2 about 90 seconds away, and there it'll be just a mere 20 meters away. And there the spacecraft will focus on aligning its docking system with the docking adapter, and then fly in to make the initial contact and give us what we will call that soft capture, or the soft capture ring will retract. And then the hooks will drive to form the hard mate. And that capture, or that initial contact, coming in about 6 minutes from now. Yes, they have. I can press them. They switch it up. Approaching 30 seconds away from waypoint 2 arrival, in which the Dragon spacecraft will be about 20 meters away, just called out 30 meters, so continuing its close in to the International Space Station. Dragon Grace now 25 meters away. Dragon has now reached waypoint 2, 20 meters away from the International Space Station, and will continue its approach to the International Space Station. And there you can see a great view of that zenith port, that space-facing port of the International Space Station's Harmony module. As the Dragon spacecraft right now sitting at waypoint 2, just 20 meters away.
Houston station for step 4 in block Bravo. Dragon attitude.
Station, Houston on the Big Loop. Dragon is on final approach and is go for docking. Monitor per steps 5 and 6 and 1.102.
Station copies, monitoring per steps 5 and 6.
And there you heard it. The final steps relayed up to the crew for final approach and docking have been given as we continue to see Dragon Grace spacecraft close the gap between them and the International Space Station. Now, just before the spacecraft reaches the international docking adapter for that soft capture, you'll hear the call out CHOP, or crew hands off point, which Dragon will continue its journey and make that initial connection, that soft capture, in those final few moments.
SpaceX Dragon, 10 meters.
10 meters.
Inside 10 meters, a little less now than 30 feet away, is all that separates Dragon Grace from the International Space Station.
Five meters.
5 meters.
Meters, chop.
2
Houston
meters.
Station, 2 meters, chop.
We have CHOP.
1 meter.
1 meter. Dragon contact and soft capture complete.
Итак, у нас есть подтверждение мягкого захвата корабля Crew Dragon C213.1 Grace Международной космической станции миссия Axiom 4. И сейчас у нас будут втягиваться, сам корабль уже будет втягиваться вплотную к узлу, будет происходить выравнивание давления, и в течение примерно 2 часов у нас будут открыты, собственно, люки между кораблем и станцией.
two vehicles closer together.
Кстати,
Two sets of six will drive to
Яндекс-переводчик не хочет мне переводить ни одну прямую трансляцию с этой стыковкой, так что, да.
There, the soft capture ring is retracting, and will do so until sensors are in
capture and firmly secure Dragon to station. And again, Axiom Mission 4 and its commander Peggy Whitson, pilot Shivanshu Shukla of ISRO, and mission specialist Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski and Tibor Kapu of ESA and Hunor have arrived to the International Space Station with contact at 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern, as the two were orbiting over the North Atlantic. The soft capture ring, that initial contact between Dragon Grace and the International Space Station, continuing to retract, and we'll await for the calls that the sensors read that it will be time for those 12 hooks on the Dragon to then begin driving and connecting itself to form a hard mate to the International Space Station.
Ring retraction complete. Docking sequence is holding for MCS reconfiguration.
И у нас есть жесткий захват. Корабль уже вплотную пристыковался к стыковочному узлу МКС. Ну и теперь у нас начнется выравнивание давления и потом открытие самих люков. Сейчас я уйду, потому что сейчас ничего интересного вообще происходить не будет, и вернусь, когда начнется уже само открытие люков. Это будет в течение 2 часов.
Astronauts and Peggy Whitson, Shivanshu Shukla, Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski, and Tibor Kapu arrive to the International Space Station, soft capture and contact at 5:31 a.m. Central Time, 6:31 a.m. Eastern, as the two were orbiting above the North Atlantic. And right now, the two mated with that soft capture, the soft capture ring retracting to pull the spacecraft closer to the International Space Station. And once given the go, the ring or the hooks around the Dragon nose cone will drive and connect to form a hard mate. teams on the ground in both Houston.
Station Houston on the big loop. MCS configured. Proceeding with hook driving.
Station copies.
And a great call there. That's the next step in this docking procedure is the driving of the hooks, the 12 hooks surrounding the nose cone or the nose of the Dragon spacecraft. And we'll monitor those. They'll drive in 2 sets of 6. The first set of 6 right now, they're traveling. And we'll continue to follow along as the docking process continues on. And then after that first set of 6, the second set will drive and connect Dragon to form a hard mate to the International Space Station. And once the docking is complete, NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, who have been monitoring from the International Space Station from the cupola of the Dragon's arrival, it'll be Ayers that'll begin the hatch opening or hatch operations. And that'll start by opening up the main hatch on the Node 2 Zenith section of the Harmony module. That's what you see Dragon connected to. And what's separating that module and the Dragon spacecraft is that and continuing to monitor that first set of 6 hooks forming that hard mate. And once the full set of 12, Ayers will continue the docking procedures with the leak checks and then begin making its way into the pressurized mating adapter. That's what you see between the Harmony module and the Dragon spacecraft, and access into there to then what we begin pressurizing the vestibule, that small compartment between the 2 hatches. And that vestibule has been exposed to the vacuum of space prior to Dragon Grace's arrival. So the next step is to carefully reintroduce that air and pressure inside so it matches both that of the station and the Dragon spacecraft. And we just received confirmation that the first set of 6 hooks have driven and closed, and we'll now begin the second set of 6 to continue that hard mate between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station. If you are just joining us, this is Mission Control Houston, where Axiom Mission 4 aboard the Dragon Grace spacecraft have connected to the International Space Station at 5:31 a.m. Central Time, currently in the process from soft capture to the hard mate to the orbiting laboratory. First set of 6 hooks have closed, and now monitoring that second set of 6, 12 in total, to form that hard mate.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, hard capture complete.
Dragon copies. Hard capture complete.
And we just heard confirmation there. All 12 hooks have closed, and that is a hard mate to the Dragon Grace spacecraft and the International Space Station, completing from soft capture to that hard mate. And these So the soft capture ring retraction in progress, and then it'll be on to establishing umbilical connections between the spacecraft and the International Space Station. That'll allow for the transfer of communications and power through those umbilicals. So where Dragon, you see that upper portion that's mostly black against the vacuum of space, but that's the solar arrays to provide Dragon power. Once those umbilicals are connected, that power will then be provided by the International Space Station, and communications will have that hardline connection with the umbilicals as well. And once those umbilicals have been connected, that'll complete the docking process, and that's when NASA astronauts Anne McClain and Nicole Ayers, namely Ayers, will jump into action and begin the leak checks and hatch opening procedures. And that'll allow the pressurization of the vestibule, the space between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station, to be brought to pressure equal to that of what is inside the station and inside the Dragon spacecraft, about 14 psi, what you experience here on Earth as sea level. And then from there, the hatch operations will continue. And the Axiom Mission 4 team will make its way on board the International Space Station with welcome remarks soon to follow. Soft capture ring has now been stowed away, and the umbilicals are in motion again to connect Dragon Grace and the International Space Station, providing that communications, that direct line of communications and power.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, docking sequence complete. Ground will be enabling hardline power and comm connections shortly. You are go to DOS suits per procedure 4.012 and begin post-docking cabin configuration per 4.400 in parallel.
Dragon copy. Docking complete. 4.012 and 4.400 are in work. And Grace is happy to be on Harmony.
And Grace Station, we are excited to welcome you. Peggy, Shug, Suave, and Tibor. We cannot wait to open the hatch and give you guys a hug. We'll see you soon.
Looking forward to it.
And Axiom 4 from Houston, welcome aboard the International Space Station. It's an honor to have you join our outpost of international cooperation and exploration.
We are honored to be here. Thank you.
Very exciting moment for all those aboard. This is Mission Control Houston, and an exciting moment for all of us here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and the International Space Station flight control rooms, as well as the teams in Axiom Space, also in Houston, and in Hawthorne, California, and SpaceX as Axiom Mission 4, the private astronaut mission with Peggy Whitson, who you just heard talking on the big loop, the single line of communications between all four parties, sharing her excitement as she returns to the International Space Station, bringing up first-time flyers and pilot Shubhanshu Shukla of ISRO and mission specialist Sławosz Uznański-Wiśniewski of ESA and Tibor Kapu of Hunor. Contact between the two, between Dragon Grace and the International Space Station at 5:31 a.m. Central Time. And now that the hooks have connected, all 12 and umbilicals deployed, providing power and communications. Now the team inside the International Space Station, namely Nicole Ayers, is going to start beginning the hatch opening procedures. And now that we're docked, she will secure some hardware and then move right into those operations. And first we'll open the large hatch at the Node 2 Zenith, or the space-facing port side of the Harmony module. And that's what you see, similar to where that NASA logo is. That's the Harmony module that the pressurized mating adapter is jettisoning up into and connecting to the Dragon Grace spacecraft. And then from there, she'll traverse into that pressurized mating adapter, and we'll begin pressurizing the vestibule, which is that small space between the hatches on Dragon and the space station. And we have talked about this has been exposed to vacuum prior to docking, and we'll need to fill that space with air to make sure that pressure is equal with the atmospheric pressures on Dragon and the International Space Station. Also putting away some hardware in the process, including the docking across. And Ayers will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce that air into the vestibule. And flight controllers here in Houston will continue to monitor the pressure and temperature readings inside and verify that everything is A-OK and leak-free before we get ready to open up the hatches. From that capture moment, which again was 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern over the North Atlantic. It takes roughly about 2 hours to get everything pressurized and checked out before we open up the hatches and welcome in Axiom Mission 4 to the International Space Station.
SpaceX Dragon on the big loop. Com check on the cabin mic.
Peggy, I have you loud and clear on the cabin mic on the big loop. Dragon, SpaceX on Dragon Aground. That call on the cabin mic actually came over Dragon Aground.
Thanks for the catch. We reconfigured.
This is Mission Control Houston as we continue to follow along the progress of the contact capture and beginning of hatch opening procedures as Axiom Mission 4 has arrived to the International Space Station with contact at 5:31 a.m. Central Time. The soft capture and ring have been retracted and stowed away. The 12 hooks around the nose, the bulkhead there of the Dragon SpaceX connected to the pressurized mating adapter have latched on to create the hard mate. The umbilicals have been extended to allow for Dragon to run on power and communication lines provided by the International Space Station. And now looking at approximately 8:35 a.m. Central Time for welcome remarks, and shortly after the Axiom Mission 4 team make their way through the hatchway and into the International Space Station. The docking procedures between the soft capture ring, the hooks, and umbilicals have been completed.
Station on the big loop. Node 2 overhead hatch is open.
Houston copies.
And a good call there down from NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers saying that she has opened up the hatch for the Node 2 Zenith way, the space-facing side of the Harmony module, to give her access to the pressurized mating adapter. And there she will cruise in to begin work on the hatch opening procedures and pressurizing
Station
the
and
vestibule.
Dragon Houston on the big loop. We are troubleshooting the big loop audio comm issues from earlier, and the action we're about to take will take down big loop comm between ISS and the Axiom crew for about 5 minutes. We may require additional comm checks after.
Station copies. Dragon copies.
Communications there on the big loop between the teams here in Houston and up to the International Space Station as they troubleshoot some communications, and the big loop that you have been hearing that have connected everyone here inside of Mission Control Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room, those aboard the space station and inside the SpaceX Dragon Grace spacecraft, and the teams in Hawthorne, California, those 4 parties, that's the big loop. They will troubleshoot those communications for about 5 minutes and then recheck. But you heard just prior to that NASA astronauts Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers have begun the hatch opening procedures, in which the large hatch at the Node 2 Zenith, that's the space-facing side of the Harmony module, has been opened, and that will allow for them to begin the hatch opening procedures and pressurize the vestibule, which is what, in addition to the comms checks, we will monitor, as Ayers will use a small valve on the station's hatch to slowly introduce air into the vestibule. That's the gap between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station that has been exposed to vacuum. And from there, they will match the pressure, the atmosphere inside both station and Dragon. And this procedure for a hatch opening usually takes about 2 hours or so to perform equipment and to allow for the access to the APAS hatch. After successful vestibule pressurization and checks. And that's the operations that Nicole Ayers is working on right now with Takuya Onishi. And Johnny Kim with camera in hand to document these procedures. And again, just on the other side of this hatchway is where the Axiom Mission 4 crew going through procedures of their own inventory and doffing their suits that they wore on the uphill ride to their initial orbit, and after an off-duty period would put back on for those dynamic phases of flight, starting with the approach initiation burn that occurred earlier this morning. If you are just joining us, good morning from Mission Control in Houston in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, as we are looking live inside of the International Space Station as NASA astronauts Nicole Ayers and Anne McClain, alongside with Commander of Expedition 73 and JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, going through a hatch opening procedures. And there you can see as the team has worked together to open up that A-pass hatch and continue on with those procedures to welcome aboard eventually the Axiom Mission 4 crew with the welcome remarks. Currently
Houston
still
Station, on the
targeting.
big loop, the APAS hatch is open and no condensation observed on the seals.
Houston copies. Looks great. Thank you.
And a perfect call down right there, as that is the...
Итак, мы продолжаем прямую трансляцию стыковки открытия люков корабля Crew Dragon 200, между кораблем Crew Dragon C213 Grace миссии Axiom Space Mission 4 и Международной космической станции. Вот уже открыт люк со стороны Международной космической станции. А я напомню, то, что в среду 25 июня в 6:31 по UTC Falcon 9 запустила Axiom Mission 4, X4 компании Axiom Space на Международную космическую станцию со стартовой площадки C213 в Космическом центре имени Кеннеди NASA во Флориде. После разделения ступеней первая ступень Falcon 90.4.2 приземлилась на посадочную площадку C1 на станции космических сил на мысе Канаверал во Флориде. Dragon C213.1 Grace автономно состыковался с космической станцией в четверг 26 июня в 10:31 UTC. За время работы на орбитальной лаборатории экипаж проведет более 60 научных экспериментов и демонстраций, посвященных исследованиям человека, наблюдению за Землей, а также наукам о жизни, биологии и материалах. Ну и мы теперь ждем открытия люка со стороны корабля Dragon.
Hatch opening procedure is the removal of the docking cross, which it looks like that is what Nicole Ayers is working on as we speak. And you sometimes catch glimpses of it on the docking procedures that was exposed to the vacuum of space to help provide targeting for visiting vehicles. But that'll be another step in this hatch opening process, again, to help clear the way for that pass-through between the Dragon SpaceX Grace spacecraft and the International Space Station. Hatch opening procedures continuing to move along for the teams aboard the International Space Station and Axiom Mission 4 as we draw closer and closer to the anticipated hatch opening and eventual welcome remarks. And we thank you for tuning in and joining us this morning as we are live from the International Space Station Flight Control Room in Houston, Texas, monitoring Nicole Ayers as she continues to work through those step-by-step procedures. As the hatchway, there you see the large square structure just off to the right-hand side of our field of view with that window in the middle was
Station
opened up.
Houston on the big loop. Just want to clarify, we want the standoff cross stowed in the standoff cross cover bag.
Houston Station copies.
And that's the teams here on the ground assisting the astronauts on board the station with those hatch opening procedures. As again, that zenith hatchway we were just mentioning before the comms opened to the right that allowed Nicole Ayers and team to pass through. And that docking cross that was just removed will be inserted into its own bag. And there is NASA astronaut Anne McLean to join Ayers in the hatchway and continue on with those procedures as they now look to cover up the A-Pass hatch, which was just opened a few moments ago, to provide an extra layer of safety and protection for astronauts passing through.
SpaceX Dragon, suit drying is complete.
And Dragon, we copy on the big loop, suit drying complete.
Good insight there from the Axiom Mission 4 perspective of their procedures that they are currently going through in anticipation of hatch opening, and welcome remarks as they make their way into the International Space Station after connecting and docking to the International Space Station about an hour and a half ago, 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern. They went through their procedures, inventory, and stowage, and doffing of their suits that they wore from launch yesterday morning from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and then during the dynamic portions of operations, and are now settling into their flight suits that they will bring in and wear as they cruise into the International Space Station. And that's the view we see from the orbiting laboratory is NASA astronaut Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers working through their procedures for hatch opening. The A-Pass hatch is open after successful vestibule pressurization and checks. They are now covering up that A-Pass hatch.
SpaceX Dragon in step 5 of 2.102. We're waiting your go for hatch open.
Dragon, SpaceX copies on the big loop. You are standing by for hatch opening. We are waiting for hardline connections to be complete. I'll call back with a go.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to rush you.
And there you heard Axiom Mission 4 Commander Peggy Whitson radioing down to the team at SpaceX. They are awaiting the go for hatch opening. I'd imagine the crew aboard the Dragon Grace spacecraft anxious and excited to float into the International Space Station for the very first time. And you just saw that orange ductwork or hose-like piece of equipment that Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers were just operating with. That's a part of helping mix the air between the International Space Station and the Dragon spacecraft. They'll continue to check some vent valves as well, so it just might be a little bit more time before we welcome the crew on board. But these final checks, again, critical to making sure that everything is good and sealed tight with no leaks and no issues, as Dragon Grace will be docked to the International Space Station for approximately the next 2 weeks.
Houston, SpaceX station is ready for Dragon hatch equalization.
Houston, copy. Stand by.
Another step in those hatch opening procedures is Nicole Ayers just radioed down for the SpaceX Dragon hatch pressurization and equalization. As you see the pop of flash bulbs aboard the International Space Station being documented, and plenty of smiles from the Expedition 73 crew as we draw closer and closer to hatch opening and welcoming Axiom Mission 4 aboard the orbital outpost. Meanwhile, here on the ground inside NASA's Mission Control, the International Space Station Flight Control Room, anticipation also building up as the room starting to fill with NASA leadership, as well as the Athena flight team continuing to work through the hatch opening procedures. Flight Director Allison Bollinger closely monitoring every step of the way as Nicole Ayers continuing to work through each checkpoint on her list. That's what you saw on the little tablet that she was referring to, making sure every step is covered as she has now floated back into the pressurized mating adapter across the APAS hatch.
Station Houston on the big loop. We're still working some ground config actions before we're ready for equalization. In the meantime, can we get confirmation that the standoff cross went into the standoff cross bag? We were unable to tell from the video.
It was in there when you guys called. Thanks.
Copy, thanks.
Hearing communications from teams on the ground as they continue to work through hatch opening procedures and making sure all pressurization and leak checks are good and everything equal between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station before the hatches can be formally opened on both sides. You can see into this hatchway, the space-facing port, or into the space-facing side of the Harmony module aboard the International Space Station and the International Docking Adapter that welcomed the connection of Axiom Mission 4 at 5:31 a.m. Central Time earlier this morning. And since then, the crews aboard both the Dragon Grace spacecraft and International Space Station have been diligently working and continue to monitor the progress of that hatch opening with teams on the ground also following suit. Station, Dragon, Houston on the Big Loop. Stand by for equalization, expected to take 1 minute.
Station copies 1 minute. Dragon copies 1 minute.
Great communications there from all teams here at NASA's Johnson Space Center and International Space Station Mission Control Room, teams in the SpaceX in Hawthorne, California, and everyone aboard the Dragon SpaceX Grace and Axiom Mission 4 and the International Space Station as we continue to march towards the hatch opening to welcome Axiom Mission 4 aboard the orbiting laboratory.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop, you are go for hatch opening per the decal, followed by the remaining actions in procedure 4.400, section 6.
Dragon copies. Go for hatch open and remainder of steps in 4.400.
We are go for hatch opening is what you have just heard. And if you are just now joining us, you are tuned into live coverage of the arrival of Axiom Mission 4, the International Space Station.
And SpaceX Dragon, hatch is coming open.
SpaceX copies.
Expedition 73 crew anxiously awaiting as we just received the go for hatch opening to welcome Axiom Mission 4 into the International Space Station. There you see Anne McLean in the foreground working on the tablet, alongside with Johnny Kim on the far right-hand side, NASA astronaut, and then Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov next to him, with Alexei Zubritsky and Sergei Ryzhikov, also of Roscosmos, in that mix. And right there in the middle, almost standing, if you will, from our perspective, is Expedition 73 Commander and JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi. From this view, they are looking up.
SpaceX Dragon hatch is open at 12:14, and we're requesting the go for the LIO change.
Copy 1214 Zulu hatch opening time, and you are go for LIO swap.
Итак, у нас здесь открытие люка со стороны корабля Cargo Dragon C213.1 Grace. А я напоминаю, то, что мы смотрим прямую трансляцию стыковки открытия люков между пилотируемым кораблем Crew Dragon C213 Grace, миссии Axiom Space Mission 4 и Международной космической станцией. Напомню, то, что запуск был произведен в среду в 25 июня в 6:31 по UTC на ракете Falcon 9 со стартовой площадки C39A в Космическом центре имени Кеннеди NASA во Флориде. На первой ступени B1094.2, которая приземлилась на посадочную площадку LC-1 на станции космических сил из Канаверал во Флориде. Dragon C213.1 Grace автономно состыковался с космической станцией в четверг, 26 июня, то есть сегодня в 10:31 по UTC. Некое время назад был открыт люк со стороны Международной космической станции, и, собственно, сейчас открыт люк со стороны космического корабля Dragon.
Just looking for clarification on your next action there. We're tracking LIO cartridge sealing per 2.102 step 6.5.
Oh, okay. And in my procedure, I had for the instructions on the decal for section. For section 4 of the instructions on the decal.
And copy that, Peggy. We'll defer to the instructions in 2.102.
Okay, that's where we are.
You just heard communications between Axiom Mission 4 Commander Peggy Whitson and the teams on the ground, as they were talking about the swapping of the lithium hydroxide cartridges, as the hatch has been opened between the Dragon spacecraft and the International Space Station just a few moments ago at 7:14 a.m. Central Time. And this is a view inside the International Space Station, looking forward, if you will, as the astronauts and cosmonauts aboard are looking up. That is towards the space-facing port of the Harmony module. That's where they are in now. If you were to keep going forward, if you will, that is the forward port, which currently is occupied by Dragon Endurance from Crew 10. And a great microgravity demonstration of the camera that Alexei Zubritsky is using to help document and be a part of the welcoming committee for Axiom Mission 4 here in the next few moments.
Dragon, Houston on the big loop. Just to confirm, we want to make sure IMV duct installation is complete before we do LiO cartridge sealing.
Yes, the IMV duct installation is complete. My bad, I didn't get it reported.
Houston copies.
Now we switch views from pretty much the point of view of what the astronauts have been looking at. From what we have seen, they were looking up, and this is the shot up into that node to zenith hatchway of the Harmony module. That is Nicole Ayers, NASA astronaut, just on the other side of that APAS hatchway, working with the Axiom Mission 4 crew. You heard them talking about IMV ducting and LiO cartridges. That IMV ducting helps mix the air of the International Space Station environment with the air inside of Dragon. And then also looking to seal up some of those lithium hydroxide cartridges that are used to scrub carbon dioxide from the air in the spacecraft on their journey to the International Space Station. And that journey started yesterday morning, 1:31 a.m. Central Time, 2:31 a.m. Eastern, as they would launch on the SpaceX Dragon, newly named Grace spacecraft, on a Falcon 9 rocket from Launch Pad 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center, and would chase down the International Space Station earlier this morning at 5:31, nearly 2 hours ago. 5:31 a.m. Central, 6:31 a.m. Eastern, a little bit more of a day's transit.
Houston and SpaceX Dragon arrival configuration is complete.
Houston copies.
SpaceX copies.
Continuing to target a welcome ceremony or welcome remarks in the near future at 8:35 a.m. Central Time. So a little bit more than an hour from now is Axiom Mission 4 and the International Space Station continuing to work through hatch opening procedures, but getting close, you can start to see a little bit of a window of opportunity that was just on the other side of astronaut Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers there, as they are working on IMV ducting, mixing the air of the station and Dragon, and lithium hydroxide cartridges, stowage and swapping out. So Anne McLean and Nicole Ayers are starting to clear out the hatchway, and we are going to see the first views of Axiom Mission 4. Commander Peggy Whitson, the first one across the APAS hatch, receiving great big hugs from Nicole Ayers and the Expedition 73 crew. Axiom Mission 4, welcome aboard the International Space Station. Pilot Shubhanshu Shukla is the next one to come across, representing ISRO. It is his first space flight for Peggy Whitson, her return to the International Space Station on her 5th flight, second as a member of Axiom Space. Sławomir Wisniewski of ESA, representing the nation of Poland, and their first visit to the International Space Station is next to cross the hatchway, and warm hugs all around, and applause.
И вот у нас наконец-то спустя почти 2 часа после стыковки и спустя Ой, почти 1,5 дня после запуска экипаж миссии Axiom Space Mission 4 влетел на борт Международной космической станции. Теперь на Международной космической станции у нас прибывает 11 человек. 4 с миссии Axiom 4, 4 с миссии SpaceX, 4 с миссии Crew 10 и 3 с миссии Союз. Я забыл, какой Союз. Сейчас посмотрим. Я точно помню, что Crew 10 был посредний, а Союз... где-то есть. Да бог его знает. Сейчас, погодите, я найду. И Союз МС-27, вот. Ну и все, на этом уже можно заканчивать прямую трансляцию, поэтому всем спасибо за просмотр и всем пока.